Our very special guest is United States Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. Thank you once again for coming on Reaching Out.
Hi, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing fine. We represent members in the New York City Housing Authority, and there are 500,000 people that are estimated to live there in New York City public housing. And that whole, I would say, industry has been forgotten for many, many years. Do you see anything possible or any optimism that NYCHA, New York City public housing in general, will get more funding?
Well, it's a huge issue because a lot of our public housing doesn't have the resources they desperately need to meet the needs of the people they support. And so I'm going to personally fight for more funding in this year's appropriation process and try to tell their stories. There's a lot of funding streams that don't work well for public housing. For example, when the states get money for homelessness to alleviate those kind of issues, they don't even count domestic violence victims in those numbers. They don't count them as homeless. And so one of the things I'm going to do is that I've actually already done is I wrote a letter to Secretary Castro asking him to please change how they count homelessness and include all these families suffering from domestic violence, because then more resources would come to us to provide for those families. So I will be an advocate for more funding, and you just sometimes have to figure out what are the best ways to do that. And so I'm going to try those two approaches.
You're spending a lot of time and effort on issues that relate to children and families. I understand that includes money for school lunches, increased physical education, and helping kids with asthma. Tell us about this work that you've undertaken.
So as a mom, I tend to see the issues that affect children and families quite easily. And I have a son who has asthma. So I've been called in the middle of the day and says, your son can't breathe. You've got to come pick him up. So you rush to school. You immediately take him to the emergency room. And you just worry so much. And I heard that story from a lot of parents in the Bronx, specifically, and around the state, that there's just this epidemic of asthma around our state, around the country, a lot because of emissions, but also because of, too much traffic, not enough parks, not enough trees, lots of reasons. And so I've thought that schools need to be better prepared. And so one of the things we put in the early childhood education bill was a provision that every school has to have someone who understands asthma and have asthma kits for all their students who have asthma. So, because we have stories of children dying because they can't breathe, that they have an attack and no one has the medicine on hand, or don't know what to do in an emergency situation, or don't call 911 fast enough. And that is not acceptable. So we now have this ability for our schools to spend money on asthma plans. We also have this issue of childhood obesity across the state, around the country, where a lot of our kids aren't getting basic phys ed or unhealthy foods in the school lunches, or just they don't know anything about nutrition. And so we also got the ability for schools to spend money on both phys ed now and nutrition, so that kids can be healthier. Because when you're an obese child, sometimes you don't sleep well at night. Sometimes you have low self-esteem. And what it means for those kids is they don't reach their full potential. And so we need to level the playing field for them and help more to give them all those opportunities. And the other thing we got done in the early childhood education bill was Aaron's Law. And this was a really important issue because children who are victims of violence in their home, sexual violence or domestic violence, they don't know how to talk about it. They don't know how to report it. They don't know how to tell someone that they've been sexually abused by a family member or someone close to the family. And the woman the bill's named after, Erin, it happened to her. She wasn't able to report what happened to her until she was an adult. And so Aaron's Law now provides that schools can spend money on age-appropriate education to teach children how to report if something terrible is happening to them at home. And that, I think, will save lives. So there's small things in the big picture, but really important things if you're one of those family members that needs this kind of help.
And school lunches.
School lunches is a difficult challenge because there was a big fight about whether to keep them nutritious. And there's actually colleagues in Washington who wanted to change the parameters. All we put in place last year was basic parameters that says you have to give a kid a half a cup of fruit and vegetables every day, period. Like, you must. And you have to, if you're going to give them grains, make sure it's whole grains. Make sure you're not giving them refined flour. Give them, pizza dough made out of whole grains, or bread made out of whole grains, or whole grain rice. And so to keep our kids healthier. And then there was certain restrictions on salt and sugar. And so we just kept pushing, and we succeeded in having the school lunch standards continue to get better and better, so that we can have basic standards for our kids' lunches. Now, there's always a fight about money, of course, and there's never enough money. We don't give schools enough money to buy all the things they want to buy. So that's a fight I just have every year, and I keep pushing to get more funding. I also push really hard on food stamps, because some of my colleagues just lack empathy. They don't understand what it's like for a family who doesn't have enough food. The number one recipient of a food stamp is a child. And so they need to do better by their constituents. And so I try to just push it hard so they don't get away with it. Because if they could cut it, they would.
They just don't think people go hungry in this country. They don't think children go hungry.
No, they don't believe it's true, or they think people are gaming the system. And I promise you, nobody wants to be on food stamps.
And some of those children, school lunch is the only meal of the day, or the best meal of the day.
Best meal of the day, the most nutritious meal of the day. That's one of the reasons why I work really hard in the summer months to extend school lunches into the summer. And it's important because a lot of kids, particularly kids in rural areas or kids who don't go to camp, they just aren't going to the places that offer lunch and food. And so we've tried to enhance all the places that are now available to offer the lunches, because you've got to keep it up in the summer, because for a lot of those families, they get no nutrition in the summer months.
As you travel throughout the state, what are some of the issues that the people in New York State are talking to you about?
Most of the things people worry about is still this question of economic certainty, and they're just worried they don't have enough money for the things they need for their kids. It's really common. It's not complicated. As you know, a lot of the things in our economy just aren't fair. The minimum wage is too low. If you're a mom with 2 kids on the minimum wage, you're in poverty. And there's a real question about what's happened to the American dream. We had this view in this country that if you work hard every day, you should not be living in poverty, that you could actually earn your way into the middle class. And that dream is dying. And we need bolder advocates who will demand a living wage. And we've got leadership. We've got mayors across the country who are getting to $15 an hour, governors getting to $15 an hour. But we need a federal minimum wage of $15 an hour. And that's really important, because to work so hard for your family and still be in poverty is outrageous. It is a humanitarian issue. It's a moral issue. So I think people, they want good jobs. They want to provide for their kids. They want to see their towns and cities grow. And as leaders, we're responsible for that. We have to help the private sector get it done. Businesses, they know how to create jobs. They know how to grow the economy, but we have to help in ways that we can. And doing something like paid leave would make a difference, making it a national insurance plan so each company doesn't have to create their own program and the burden shouldn't be on them alone. Having people have an earned benefit would make a difference.
What's interesting, you mentioned all those issues that need support, and the group that supports all of these issues and is been the advocate and the voice for America have been unions.
Yeah.
And our voices are just about to be silenced. I mean, with the Friedrichs case coming up in the Supreme Court and the attack on labor, I don't know what this country is going to become without labor.
Labor has always been the voice of the people and the voice of working Americans. And labor fights hard for fairness and allows everyone to earn their way into the middle class and to live the American dream. And people who fight against labor are wrong, and they don't understand how important it is to have a voice, to have that ability to bargain collectively, to amplify your voice by being part of a union. And it's really part of our democracy. And so what we have to do, Greg, is just fight harder and make sure those voices are heard.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this segment of Reaching Out, and this has been very helpful. I've enjoyed our discussion. You were listening to Reaching Out with Gregory Floyd, our very special guest, United States Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York.
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg. Thank you.
Okay.